Part 12. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 111. Before Scyther could think about it, another mud ball was thrown from Xiu's hand, and the target was Scyther. Scyther didn't think too much and raised his hand to easily split the one thrown by Xiu, but the mud balls flew over one after another. Xiu's two arms played the feeling of eight-armed Vajra, and the mud balls flew towards Scyther like bullets from a machine gun. For a while, Scyther was overwhelmed, and mud balls kept missing, and some hit it. After a while, Scyther was covered with mud. "Hurry up, your reaction is too slow, your knife is too slow," Xiu said while throwing. "If you miss one, add 5, and if you hit one, add 10. Scyther, who was already a little panicked, missed 3 balls in a row after hearing these words, and only reacted after being hit by a ball and split the next few. "Add 25 balls, Xiu roared mercilessly, and the mud balls in his hand never stopped. When the mud balls piled up in front were almost thrown, Xiu started to move around Scythe. Because at this time Xiu already felt that Scythe had found the feeling, it was time to start the next round of mobile attack, attacking from different directions. Scythe, who had just survived the stormy attack from the front, had a bad feeling when he looked at Xiu running around him. Soon a new offensive came, but this time it was no longer about quantity, but uncertainty. Circling around Scythe, Xiu threw a few from time to time, and then changed direction and threw from different angles. This was a great test for Xiu's physical strength, otherwise he would have fallen before Scythe finished training. Fortunately, Xiu had also practiced before, and his endurance was quite strong, otherwise he would not have used this method. However, the good times did not last long, and Scythe, which was only standing in place, quickly counter-suppressed Xiu's offensive. The reason was simple: Xiu was tired, and after the previous consumption, his physical strength could not keep up, the speed of the mud balls he threw was greatly reduced, and the number did not pose a threat. Xiu, who was still spinning in circles, stopped. He realized that his behavior was quite stupid. Why did he want to compete with the elves in physical fitness? Their recovery abilities were not on the same level. Stop. Take a break first. Xiu looked at the mud on the ground that almost flattened the grass, especially near Scyther. Now you can't even see its feet, and the mud has reached its calves. Xiu looked at the time. It was less than an hour. If he continued like this, he would definitely die of exhaustion first. No. Changes must be made. It was originally a trial stage, and Xiu changed his strategy without hesitation. As for how to do it? An old man said, "Use elves to fight elves." Xiu set his sights on Casey in the distance. He just needed to vent his superpowers, so this was a good way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Xiu quickly ran to the side to call Casey over, and then explained the method. Sometimes Casey is really omnipotent, especially its telekinesis is so practical that there is nothing that cannot be used. Condense a mud ball in this venue to attack Scythe. The angle is random, but control the strength first. Don't use all your strength. Wait for my order. After the 2 sides were arranged, Xiu left the venue and looked at the 2 elves. Scythe knew that Casey had the strongest strength, but Xiu didn't often use its ability. He would only let it take action in some special circumstances. This was not the first time that the 2 had competed. They had also had related sparring before. When Casey floated up, Scythe knew that a stronger attack than before was coming, but it was not panicked at all, and even eager to try. You know, it's not just Casey who is getting stronger. It's time to show its true strength. Then it saw Casey open his eyes, and the mud on the entire venue emerged with a faint blue light, and then crawled towards Casey like a worm. The mud ball gathered between Casey's gestures was already as tall as a person, but it seemed that the situation was far from over, and it had just begun. Looking at the huge mud ball condensed above Casey's head, Scythe was stunned. What's going on? Where am I? What am I doing? With such a big mud ball coming at me, let alone whether it can be split, even if it is split, it will be a dead end. Xiu was also a little confused when he saw this. What is Casey doing? It actually collected all the mud. Looking at the huge mud ball wrapped in blue light, Xiu frowned, but did not shout to stop Casey's behavior. He believed that Casey would not do something meaningless. The current Casey is no longer the Casey at the beginning. However, he still had to give Scythe a shot of cardiotonic, otherwise Xiu felt that Scythe was going to run away. Don't be afraid, focus on the attack, think about the rhythm just now, and split everything. Xiu's words more or less worked. Seeing Scythe stabilized, Xiu gave an order, training begins. Casey's whole body was covered in blue light, and there was a light in his eyes that seemed to be materialized. Xiu knew that Casey in this state had gone all out. Following Xiu's order, Casey raised his hands, and the mud balls in the air began to separate into fist-sized mud balls, and then he pressed his hands down fiercely, and those mud balls shot towards Scythe as if being pulled by something. Scythe saw the dense attack like raindrops and could only swing the sickle in his hand with all his strength, trying to stop all the mud balls from his body. It only has two hands even if it dances well, but Casey can easily drive 5 or 6 mud balls, and it seems that this is not its limit. I don't know what Hu Dai taught it at the beginning. Focus, watch those attacks. Don't force yourself into a dead end, leave room for dodging. Pay attention to maintaining physical strength, don't fight if you can dodge. Xiu watched the battle from the side and gave a few nonsense instructions from time to time. He found that Casey was indeed more suitable than Xiu to go out in person. First of all, it doesn't have to worry about ammunition, and the ones that were split by Scythe will flow to it soon. Also, Casey doesn't have to circle around like him stupidly, because superpowers have no dead angles within the range. As for the strength, Casey is also better than Xiu throwing with his hands. This is clear from the effect. How good Scythe was in Xiu's hands just now, how miserable it is now. After all, this effect is normal in front of Casey's machine gun. But Xiu's attention on the side is not on this. The reason why he asked Casey to come was to judge the amount of superpowers in it. From the current situation, Casey's superpowers are increasing, and the increase is huge. This also means that there is not much time left for him. If this growth cannot be controlled as soon as possible, no matter how optimistic Xiu is, he will have to face reality. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 112. After the training, the flying mantis stood by the river, while Xiu kept pouring river water on it with a water ladle, and then took out a brush and brushed it hard. The exoskeleton of flying mantis was brand new under Xiu's wiping, and all the mud remaining from the previous training disappeared. It's just that the already pitted blade has new damage. But like nails, these things will grow out sooner or later. And Xiu seems to have discovered some very interesting phenomena, that is, the flying mantis's sickle seems to be harder than before after it grows back. Dining room on the first floor of the institute. Xiu asked Drok about his conjecture. There is a problem with your statement. You ignore that the flying mantis itself is in the growth stage, and its body strength is constantly getting stronger. Moreover, the metal elements it ingests will also transform its body, making it stronger. Strength. It's true that I didn't expect it, Xiu nodded and admitted. According to Drok, it must be more comprehensive. Drok saw Xiu and fell silent again. He suddenly frowned and said, "What are you doing? You've been frowning all day long. I haven't seen you sober since I saw you in the afternoon." Drok's words made Xiu temporarily recover, and he explained with a smile, "I was just thinking about something." "It's Casey, right?" Drok put down the tableware with a hint of regret in his tone, but it was hard to say what he was regretting. "How does the doctor know?" Xiu looked up at Drok, his expression a little surprised. "Don't come here." Drum didn't agree with him and scolded him with a smile. "You kid, don't think I'm stupid. Who can't tell that with your behavior?" Shiu heard the hidden meaning of Drum's words and asked quickly, "Doctor, I have some questions that I need your help to answer." "Tell me." Drum had obviously anticipated his answer. He calmly picked up the bowl and chopsticks again and said casually, "I want to make Casey evolve in a short time. Is there anything the doctor can do?" "Huh." Drum's hand stopped when he picked up the bowl and chopsticks. He was stunned for a moment before looking up at Chiu. He originally thought it was just Chiu who couldn't figure it out and needed some guidance from the elders, but he didn't expect that he would throw the whole problem to himself. Droe looked at Chiu with a hint of confusion. This is not like his style. "Tell me what you think first." Seeing Dromu like this, Chiu didn't dwell on the issue anymore, but spoke out his thoughts. "I found that Casey's superpowers increased too fast. If I don't think of a way, I might be dead. Now I don't have a clue to solve it. I can only try my luck in one direction. What if it will be fine after evolution? It can't be that easy." Drama curled his lips after hearing Shiu's words. Until now, no one has completely cracked the secret of elf evolution, and few people would regard a super elf like Casey as such. The research subject, coupled with this strange mutation, no one knows whether it will return to its original state or become more terrifying after evolution. After Droe finished speaking, he looked at Chiu and added in a slightly teasing tone, "Do you think it is the out-of-control Casey or the out-of-control Yongjira that is more scary? The road has to be paved." When the PhD devoted himself to this field, how many projects were done by predecessors? Didn't they all succeed in the end? What Chiu said sounded nice, but Dromu was not confused by him. "You are right to say that. I could indeed be said to have overcome all obstacles back then. It's just that you are different from me. You don't have the corresponding knowledge, especially the difficulty of this topic. It is impossible to succeed if you want to study it directly. Don't think you are the only smart person in the world, and you are still far behind those real geniuses. What if we add a doctor? You want me to help you?" Dioramu looked at the boy in front of him and couldn't figure out why he thought he would help him. Anyway, the experiment on the flying mantis cannot be carried out now. The doctor will definitely not waste time waiting, and isn't studying Casey's evolution also a good topic? Haha. What you said makes sense, but you seem to have forgotten what I am studying. They are not in the same direction at all. Do you really think that I am omnipotent? Can't even a doctor do it?" Shiu looked disappointed. "Then let's change direction." Shiu's knowledge base is certainly not enough to support him in doing this kind of research, but he knows that this direction is feasible. Because the rockets have done it before. They catalyzed a Magi carp into a red Gyarados in the Lake of Wrath. It's the one on Yulongdu's hand in the animation. Since it can be done in the anime, it should also be possible here in the same world. It's just that Chiu didn't intend to do this in the first place. He had a more reliable method. "What can I do?" Dromu asked subconsciously, but only then did he realize that he seemed a little curious. "Studying Casey's brain, I have to find a way to suppress it." Dromu was silent for a while after hearing this idea and then said, "What do you want to do?" Shiu didn't have a big reaction after listening to Droe's words, but just said, "I have to find a way to curb Casey's uncontrolled growth." Dromu looked at Shiu with a suspicious look on his face. He didn't believe that Shiu could do anything. He just hesitated when he saw Shiu's confident smile. "That's it?" Yes, Shiu nodded and added, "I also need to borrow some of the doctor's equipment." "Okay, since you have such confidence, then I don't mind. The laboratory can be lent to you, but what to use must be approved by me." The two had a more detailed consultation and soon decided that Chiu would borrow the laboratory. This project is completely worthless in the eyes of Drook. This is a change in the body structure, and it is difficult to remedy it with acquired methods. Therefore, even if he has free time recently, he did not agree to help Xiu with this. But it doesn't matter if he lets him borrow the laboratory. The main thing is that he wants to see if Xiu has the ability. For Xiu, being able to borrow the laboratory is already good, especially there are many very professional instruments in it. As for the others, even if he is rubbish, he is still a college student, and his major in science and engineering gives him the confidence to say so. But this is only one of the ways. Xiu does not intend to rely on this. It is still the most correct to start from Casey's own situation. After packing up his things, Xiu went back to the warehouse. He wanted to discuss with Casey. Dr. Oak was right. This situation is not the time for him to fight alone. He must discuss with Casey. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 113. The next morning. The study room of the Research Institute. Doctor, that's all, right? Xiu stood aside with a large stack of file bags, while next to him was Dr. Oak, who was searching on the bookshelf. That should be enough. These are some of my previous research records on Casey, but they are all about habits and the like, and the reference value is not high. Let's finish reading these first. Xiu, holding the files, weighed some of them and said with a wry smile, I don't know when I will finish reading these. Dr. Oak next to him asked with a little curiosity, are you really going to do it? Yes. Even if I can't do it, maybe I can find other corresponding methods from it. Xiu was prepared for this and must solve it as soon as possible, otherwise let Casey evolve. Thinking of this, Xiu said, by the way, doctor, can I borrow the device for checking brain waves tonight? Yes, sure. Dr. Oak nodded, and looking at Xiu's determined eyes, he hesitated and added, if you have any questions, you can ask me. Those are dangerous, don't mess around. Thank you, doctor. Xiu was particularly excited after hearing this, and hurriedly bowed slightly to Dr. Oak. Okay, I'm afraid you'll break my equipment, but those can't be bought with money. Dr. Oak waved his hand as if he was very disgusted and left directly. Xiu hurriedly followed. Dr. Oak's words just now have already shown that he will provide help for his research. Don't underestimate Dr. Oak, he is also proficient in machinery and the like. Not to mention that according to Xiu's memory, the future Pokemon encyclopedia is likely to be developed by him. Although this character has not yet been drawn, many of the instruments in the laboratory upstairs are made by him, which is terrifying. According to the information obtained by Xiu, many instruments on the market use his patents, and a large part of Dr. Oak's research funds come from these sources. Otherwise, how could he afford the expenses of the institute just by sitting here? Not to mention the elves in the backyard. Being able to get the help of Dr. Oak means that the original 0.1% success rate will immediately soar to 90%, and it will rise as time goes by. As soon as they walked out of the library, the two heard a series of muffled sounds, but they were not surprised. You are really good. This kind of training is indeed comparable to actual combat, but my backyard is almost destroyed by your elves. Xiu hurriedly went up and said, I have marked out a small piece of open space in the backyard for them, so they won't hit other places. Whatever, the fragments are almost there, and we can start further experiments soon. Dr. Oak seemed very happy when he said this, and was obviously very interested in the results. A large area near the back mountain and the river was specially marked out by Xiu for the training of elves. Now Casey and Scythe are here to conduct various simulated combats according to the plan given by Xiu. Xiu, holding the documents, sat down outside the venue and watched the two of them. Compared with the exaggerated situation yesterday, Casey is no longer controlling a large mud ball today, but controlling 6 fist-sized mud balls to attack Scythe back and forth. Every time Scythe slashes with its sword, the mud balls will condense again, so 6 will hit the strength of 60. As for Scythe, it has long been accustomed to this intensity of attack, and it is easy to slash the mud balls attacking from different directions. However, Xiu did not let Casey increase the difficulty, because this is just the beginning, and Scythe's physical strength will not be able to keep up soon, and then he will repeat the situation of being beaten by Casey yesterday. But he didn't forget what Professor Oak said just now. As long as it is confirmed, the experiment will start. I don't know. When Xiu thought of this, he frowned. He is a person who likes to be safe by nature and doesn't like to take risks. He doesn't want to agree to Professor Oak's plan, but this may be an opportunity for Scythe. In his own words, he is afraid of burying its talent. So Xiu is still very entangled about this. Forget it, the boat will straighten out when the bridge comes. Professor Oak is more nervous about Scythe than me, so there shouldn't be any problem. Although I don't want to admit it, this is the fact. Facing Professor Oak, he has no right to refuse, and can only try to get more benefits. Soon Xiu reacted and picked up the information in his hand and read it. Instead of complaining here, it is better to find a way to solve this problem by himself. The information on hand is just some very superficial knowledge, most of which are records of Professor Oak's tracking and researching elves like Casey. However, Xiu also admires Professor Oak a little. There are a total of 12 pieces of information here, which means that Professor Oak had studied 12 different Caseys. What kind of Pokemon is Casey? According to Casey, the Casey clan has the habit of living in groups. This may be a little looser than living in groups, but it is not easy for ordinary people to follow Casey over Pokemon like Yongjira and Alakazam, not to mention the magical skill teleport. Therefore, Pokemon like Casey are rarely seen in the black market or in the open, or psychic Pokemon are rare, and the Alliance is extremely strict in controlling psychic Pokemon. After reading the information briefly, Xiu had a better understanding of the habits of a Pokemon like Casey, but this did not help solve Casey's current problem. What he really wanted was Casey's body structure, especially the part about the brain. To put it bluntly, it was an autopsy report. In fact, Xiu wanted a living Casey with a normal body. It was obviously better to observe the mechanism of inhibition in this way than to study it in the information, but this was completely impossible. Let alone whether he had a chance to get it, even if he got it, he could not do such a thing. Looking at Scyther and Casey on the field, Xiu's thoughts drifted farther and farther. The laboratory on the second floor of the institute. Hello, Dr. Xiu took over the conversation with a smile and said, I want to help Casey do an examination. Okay, you can use it, right? To be honest, Dr. Oak was also very curious about Casey and wanted to know the specific data of this thing that Xiu said could be equivalent to 3 Caseys. Basically understand, know how to operate it. After Xiu finished speaking, Casey walked to the other side and came to the instrument he had checked before. Lie down. You may feel a little numb from the electric current during the examination. Don't worry. It's normal. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 114. Casey lay quietly in that position, opening his eyes and watching Xiu build those lines on his body. Seeing this, Xiu remembered something, smiled and comforted, it's okay, I'm right next to you. Because it was his own experiment, Xiu certainly couldn't occupy Dro's computer. Fortunately, there are still a few obsolete machines in the institute, which he has now reused. Xiu had done his homework a long time ago. After the connection was completed, he tapped the keyboard to call the programs to record and monitor Casey's situation. Then he walked over and comforted. Okay, close your eyes and take a nap. Casey looked at the man in front of him, then slowly closed his eyes. 2 hours passed quickly. Xiu put away the materials in his hands and looked up at Casey lying on top. Xiu tried this thing himself, and it was almost impossible to fall asleep. Casey was just meditating now. Okay, let's get up, eat something and then go back to the poke ball to rest. Casey's activity time for the day is almost up and he needs a rest. Casey slowly opened his eyes after hearing Xiu's words, and then his body emitted blue fluorescence and floated up. All the lines connected to it were also disconnected and placed in sequence. Xiu just looked at it silently and stretched out his hand to catch it. However, Casey had no intention of contacting him, and the light converged and fell to the ground. But Xiu could only retract his hands angrily and take out something to replenish it. That's it. After Xiu took Casey back to the elf ball, he hurriedly called Dromu and wanted to let him see the data. He knew how to operate it, but he wasn't very good at it. After all, no one taught him, and there was no instruction manual. Wow, this data is really more than 3 times exaggerated than the average. Casey Droki said to himself like a child who found a new toy, looking at the data displayed on the computer. This is Casey who has lost control. How is the growth going? Seeing Dromu like this, why did Xiu feel so scared? Doctor, is there nothing wrong with Casey? Huh, Dromu was stunned when he heard this, turned to look at Xiu aside, and then said, oh. There's no problem, it's just that the brain development is a little advanced, which is similar to your situation. What Dromu said made Xiu not know what to say. Ha ha ha. Just kidding. Seeing Xiu's expression, Dromu said with a smile, the body is weaker than the average Casey, but the brain development is very good. The good ones are a bit exaggerated. I suggest you adjust it later. Adding a little more to Casey's rations is good for his health, and improving his physical condition should help Casey's current situation. Yes, the rations I gave Casey did contain brain-stimulating materials. I will go back and change them right now. Xiu only remembered this after being reminded by Droe. In order to make Casey eat better, I had improved on the formula given by Baoba. I just forgot that Casey was different from ordinary Casey. There was no need to strengthen the brain. It was better to strengthen the body. Dromu on the side said, show me your ration formula, and the one for flying mantis. But after he finished speaking, he frowned, and added, forget it, just take them all. When Xiu heard what Dromu said, he quickly went to get a pen and paper and wrote out the 3 ration recipes. It's good to get Droki's guidance. Besides, this formula is not a secret. I have changed it many times. But after Dromu got the 3 formulas, his brows furrowed and his expression gradually became strange. Is this someone else's or your own? Dromu's eyes moved from the paper to Xiu and asked in an unclear tone. I improved it based on the original formula handed down by a breeder. Xiu said it without hesitation. After all, Droe's reaction seemed to have something wrong. Write down the original formula. Dromu spoke concisely and handed the paper to Xiu again. Yes, Xiu took the paper and wrote it again. Because Xiu had memorized this before, he wrote very smoothly and finished it in a few minutes. When Xiu handed the paper over again, he asked tentatively, is there something wrong? Droki took the formula, took a look at it, pointed out a few ingredients on it and asked, the question is not a big one, but why did you add these things? Xiu looked at the ingredients pointed out by Dromu. Those were all added by Xiu to adjust the texture and taste, and some were added to increase the elf's abilities. Although I didn't know why he asked, Xiu still answered honestly. After hearing this, Droe smiled and asked, didn't that breeder tell you not to make random changes? Did I make a mistake? Xiu knew that he might be smart after hearing what Dromu said. Nonsense, the original recipe was so good, but you changed it like this. Dromu picked up the paper, lifted it up, and lectured him, fortunately, I only added some insignificant ingredients. What if I added the wrong ingredients? It's troublesome, no problem can come from eating it. Then change it back. Seeing Shiu, Droki complained like this, how do you change it? You don't even know what these are useful for. Why do you change them? I know, Shiu continued naturally. Huh, Dromu was stunned on the spot, and slowly retracted his raised hand, and then asked, then why did you change it to this? Wait, Shiu finally understood and asked, why do you think there is something wrong with my formula? Look here, Dro pointed out a name and asked, why do you add chocolate to Scyther's rations? This is obviously a material widely used to make burn medicine. After seeing this, Shiu narrowed his eyes and asked, Doctor, what do you think is the right ration? Dro didn't expect Shiu to dare to refute him. For a moment, he even forgot to speak. After a pause of a few seconds, he replied, provide the nutrients needed for the growth of the Pokémon, and enhance the Pokémon's abilities in certain aspects. Then what's wrong with my formula? Shiu took the formula and pointed to the chocolate that Dro just mentioned and explained, Doctor, since you know that this material is used to make some burn medicine, do you know what this material does? Although my research direction is not materials science, I also know that chocolate can have a good therapeutic effect on burns. Dro thought for a while and added, taking this will not improve the Pokémon's abilities in certain aspects. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 115. This doctor is wrong. Qiao Ke Guo can really enhance certain abilities of elves, but this ability is not outstanding and will only show up under special circumstances. Shiu talked eloquently and did not feel panic at all because his opponent was Dromu. After hearing Shiu's words, Dromu thought for a moment and then asked, is it resistance to flames? That's right, Shiu nodded to Dromu with a smile, and then said, the effect of chocolate fruit on burns is not to directly act on the wound like berry fruit, but to assist in the treatment by enhancing the elf's resistance to burns. Burn. Is that so? Dromu looked a little skeptical and asked, is this your discovery? No, Shiu denied it without hesitation, and then added, this is someone else's discovery. I just quoted it. As for whether the effect is like this, the doctor will know after trying it. I really don't know this. Dromu didn't make any attempt to hide it, and he directly admitted that he didn't know this. After hearing this, Shiu smiled and said, this is because doctors are not studying this area. It is normal for this kind of situation to happen. After all, no one dares to claim to know any material. Although Shiu's purpose was to let Dromu borrow the donkey from the slope, there was no compliment in this sentence. Dromu's areas of expertise are mechanical electronics and elves. Forget about these complicated materials, even people who specialize in these materials dare not say that they know all of them. That's why Shiu can be clever and pretend to be in front of Dromu. Then why did you change the original formula to this? Dromu skipped this and brought the topic back. Although fire resistance is very important for the flying mantis, compared to this, the increase rate of the original formula is not better. The doctor is right. The speed of the flying mantis is indeed very important. There is no problem with the original formula being used to enhance this aspect. It is even the best choice to maximize the advantages of the flying mantis. As he spoke, Shiu suddenly stopped. And then said with a weird smile, but the problem is for the flying mantis. You have already let the flying mantis evolve into the giant pincer mantis. Dromu understood immediately after hearing Shiu's words, with a bit of surprise on his face, obviously incredulous at Shiu's idea. No, Shiu nodded and replied, just in terms of applicability, whether it is a flying mantis or a giant pincer mantis, the more important thing is fire resistance. Did you think of it yourself? Well, I do know that the flying praying mantis may evolve, but I didn't expect that the flying praying mantis would actually. Shiu was also in a strange mood now. He had a very strange feeling that he didn't know how to describe. Daramu smiled when he saw Xiu like this and said, "Isn't this great? I will give you the strongest giant claw mantis in return. I'm not interested in fighting. Being the strongest doesn't mean anything to me. I just want to give them what I can, and that's enough. Stop talking about this. How are you going to change Casey's formula?" Droki was obviously a little interested in this topic, and asked before Xiu could continue to express his feelings about life. Xiu thought for a moment and replied, "I'm going to replace the pear fruit with a pineapple fruit. Why not replace it with lemon fruit? As far as I know it has the same effect. First of all, it's a matter of taste, and secondly, guandu fruit is rare, and its price is at least several times that of pear fruit." It had been a few days since the last discussion about rations. In fact, both of them were right. It was just a matter of concept that led to that discussion. Just like Droe believes that increasing speed is correct, while Xiu believes that fire resistance is more important. The two different concepts are entirely due to differences in cognition. That's all it is said. As for why not add both to achieve the desired effect? That's because different materials will interact with each other. This cannot be done by adding them randomly. Some materials will strengthen when added together, but some will weaken when added together, and some may even turn into toxins. That's why there are professional people. Otherwise, what do you think cultivators do? Does just feeding the elves require such a strict assessment? So this is not something that can be changed by just modifying it. Although it is a bit bragging to say so, those who can modify the formula by themselves have some skills. At least they know whether these things can be put together and whether this kind of elf can eat it. When the formula was revised, it was not Casey and the others who ate the most, but himself. This is why Droe asked him if he understood before, and this was what he asked. This matter is over, but Xiu has been busy making new rations these past few days, so he doesn't have much time to care about other things. Anyway, they can handle the training of Casey and Flying Mantis on their own, and Xiao Fudan plays well with the elves in the backyard, so there is no need for him to worry at all. Speaking of which, Little Lucky Egg's affinity for elves is really exaggerated. In the past few days, the elves in the backyard have treated it like a little princess. In fact, there aren't many changes to the formula. The Flying Mantis and Little Lucky Egg only need minor changes, while only Casey's needs major changes. After all, if one of the main materials has been changed, the matching auxiliary materials must also be changed. But it was much easier with Droki's help, and the second half of their conversation basically revolved around this topic. In the end, even if Professor Oak is not researching this field, his basic knowledge is a bit too solid, so Xiu can only agree with him. "Doctor, do you want to try it?" Xiu took the new rations in a beaker and put them on the table. "Go away, don't bother me," Professor Oak complained with disdain. "I was wondering why you were so kind to bring snacks last time, but I didn't expect it to be elf rations." "What's wrong with elf rations? The ingredients are no different from what humans eat, and I've roasted them." Xiu didn't have any self-awareness at all, and took the rations in the beaker and threw two into his mouth. "How dare you say that?" Dro looked distressed. "You actually made rations into cookies and tricked me into eating them." "Hey, look at what you said. The rations left over by Casey can't be wasted, right? There's nothing wrong with using them to make cookies." Xiu laughed and retorted, "and I just put it on the table, and the doctor took it himself." Listening to Xiu's words, Dro felt like he couldn't refute it. Thinking about it carefully, he really took it himself, but now he thinks it tastes really good. But Dro quickly reacted, cleared the distracting thoughts in his mind, and focused his attention on work again. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 116. When Chiu saw that Droe was silent, he raised his hand and touched his bald head, and said to himself, "This is good for the brain." People who do scientific research work are very hard on the brain, and doctors often stay up late. If you don't patch it up, you will be bald in a few years. It's not good. You can go play outside and don't disturb my work. Dromu stood up and walked towards Chiu. "Hey! Doctor, you can't do this. I'm doing this for your own good." Dromu pushed Chiu out of the laboratory with a playful smile. After driving Chiu out of the laboratory, Droki sat on the computer chair again and sighed, "Wow, the world is clean." Droe, who was just about to continue working, accidentally saw the beaker Chiu left on the table. Looking at the rations inside, he remembered what Chiu had just said. After just a little fantasy about how he would look bald, Dromu stood up as if he had seen something terrifying. Almost instinctively, he reached out and touched his hair and murmured, "Bald. No. No." Dromu shook his head to remove the scene just now, then looked back at the direction of the stairs, then sat down again and stared at the beaker. For a moment, Dromu looked back again, but his hand reached towards the beaker. Putting 2 rations into his mouth, Dromu smashed them in his mouth and murmured, "It doesn't taste right, why is it sour?" At this time, a voice suddenly came from downstairs and shouted, "Doctor! The biscuits are on the table where the sundries are placed, and the beaker is the newly prepared ration. Don't finish it? I haven't given it to Casey to try yet." The sound almost gave Dromu a heart attack, and he slumped in his chair for a while before he recovered. As for Chiu, he had already left the research institute. What he said just now was just a joke. He didn't know what Droke was doing, but he just wanted to laugh at Droke's concept. In fact, the basic ingredients of the rations are similar to those eaten by humans. They are all meat, fruits, and vegetables. At most, some ingredients can be added. These can be eaten by humans, and the nutritional mix of the rations is even more reasonable. I had seen him eat before when Baoba taught him how to prepare rations, but I didn't know why Dromu was so resistant. The rations are obviously quite delicious. Chiu originally prepared a lot of rations for Casey, but now he still has more than half of them left. This is not suitable for the flying mantis and the others. It would be a waste to throw it away, so he can only solve it by himself. Turning granular rations into biscuits is not an easy task, and there is another very interesting thing during the process. Because pear fruit is bitter, even if the taste is tempered, it will still have a bit of bitterness. But what I didn't expect was that after roasting, the bitterness was gone. Instead, it had a mellow aroma, but it was very subtle and could only be felt after eating. This is a very interesting discovery. Perhaps other materials will also have different changes after different processing. And Chiu was not wrong. This thing seems to have the same effect on humans, but it is not so obvious, so it is correct to say that it can replenish the brain. The knowledge of these things reminded Chiu of a tree fruit called phlox fruit. The fruit of this tree looks like a small purple gourd. According to the description in the game, it should have the ability to enhance resistance to superpowers. Maybe you can get some and try it yourself. Although Chiu didn't care much about this, no one would think twice if he could live for 2 more years, and he didn't want to become a mess. But the problem is that I don't seem to see much of the Fulu fruit in Gwandu. If I want to buy it, I have to go through Dr. Damu's channel to order it, and the price will go up. Thinking of this, Chiu quickly walked toward the warehouse. "PhD. What for?" Dromu replied angrily when he heard Chiu's voice. "Doctor, I got some good stuff for you." Chiu smiled and leaned forward. "Ha!" Dromu glanced back and said with a smile, "Are you so kind? Are you asking me for something? What you said, doctor, is wrong. I have always been so kind. My colleagues used to say that I am a very nice person." Chiu put 2 glass jars on the table. Didn't doctor say that he wanted to eat snacks? Brought to you. What is this? Dr. asked, looking at the contents of the jar. Preserved fruit, made with some fruits. Xiu Dai introduced it to Dr. and finally added, "This is good stuff, you can't find it elsewhere." "So you made it yourself?" Dr. reached out and fiddled with the two cans. "This one is made with peach fruit as the main ingredient and has a sweet taste. The other one is made with blue tangerine and has a sour taste." Xiu introduced it to Dr. like a treasure, but Dro seemed a bit unwilling to accept him. "Tell me, what else do you need my help with? Can you help me?" "Dr. do you want some snacks?" "I just have some, so I'll give them to the doctor to try." Xiu never mentioned his plans because he could see that Dr. was a little bad-tempered today. Although he didn't know the reason, it would be foolish for him to mention it. What's more, there is no rush, there is no need to sacrifice for the small. "Really? Your kid has finally mutated," Dr. said, a little surprised. Just looking at Dr's expression, Xiu felt that he was complaining about himself. Unexpectedly, Droki is also an old hermaphrodite. Haha, Xiu smiled awkwardly. "Doctor, give it a try, I have to leave first." After Xiu said this, he picked up the beaker and left the laboratory as if running away. After Xiu left, Dro stood up. His serious expression just now collapsed. He looked at the biscuits that were broken on the computer chair and shook his head. He smiled a little more when he looked at the two cans of things on the table. He said, "He is thoughtful." After Xiu ran out with the beaker, he looked back a few times. Dro's temper changed so much in just a short while. He just went up and really interpreted what it means to throw meat buns at a dog, there is no return. But forget it, just treat it as respecting the elderly. After all, Dro has helped him a lot. He himself is reluctant to eat it. It's all Scythe who eats a lot, even Casey didn't eat much. Now he has to buy some raw materials to make it again, but the quality is definitely not as good as this. But now that it has stabilized, he can try other methods that are more time-consuming, and maybe he can also make some fruit wine. He knows a lot of things. Before, he only made these kinds because he had no fixed place to live. One is to facilitate storage, and the other is that the production cycle is short. Now he has time to try other things and study these fruits. By the way. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 117. There are ordinary fruits in this world, but they are quite different from those in the previous life. Now I have time to try them. Thinking of this, even Xiu's steps became a little brisk. He walked to the training ground and stopped the two elves, then handed the beaker over and said, "Here, let's try this new one." Casey just glanced at the rations inside the beaker before a few flew out and fell directly into its mouth. "Come on, you can try it too." Xiu Jian saw the flying mantis next to him looking curious and fed him a little. This one to strengthen his physique was suitable for him, so there was no problem in just letting him try the taste. It was just that Casey was expressionless while eating, but the flying mantis shivered after eating it, which made Xiu laugh. "Is it too sour?" "I think it's okay." After finishing speaking, Xiu ate 2 pills by himself. Whether it is sour or not is related to the ratio and other ingredients. This is what he has been studying these days. This is not just about changing the materials, but also reconfiguring the proportions according to some conditions, which is a lot of work. Counting that this is now the 5th model, since it is already the 5th model, the first 4 models have naturally failed. That is to say, I would adjust it so carefully, and usually the store clerks would give me the formula directly. Of course, this is also related to the fact that those stores have a lot of experience. Their formulas are all effective, otherwise it would not be so lively. According to Baoba, it's better to make the elves' rations yourself. It saves money and is safe, and you don't have to worry about being choked by others. That's why we have today's cultivation. How's it going? Xiu asked Casey beside him. After eating just now, Casey didn't speak anymore, but closed his eyes and felt something. It wasn't until Xiu asked that he said, "The effect is a little stronger than the previous one, but it can be strengthened." After listening to Casey's words, Xiu thought about it and said, "If you add more, the taste will become more sour, and you won't be able to absorb so much. This also has an upper limit, otherwise others can just eat pineapple fruits without any need for rations. Each elf has a different absorption efficiency for these. This will test the ability of the trainer or breeder." And Xiu had already tested the pineapple fruit on the day it arrived, otherwise how could he determine the content through calculation? There is no professional breeder like Xiaogang around him, and Dramu will not help him with such low-level things. The only one he can rely on is himself. Xiu looked at Casey and said, "Let's do this. I'll think of ways to change it and see if I can enhance the effect." Having said that, it is almost impossible to increase the ratio of pineapple fruit if the ratio of pineapple is not changed, and it is useless if it is increased because it cannot be absorbed. He said this mainly because he saw that Casey was a little impatient, so he should stabilize it first and then speak slowly. "By the way, what about you?" Xiu turned his attention to the flying mantis and asked, "How do you feel about eating new rations these days?" "It said it's about the same, I don't feel anything at all," Casey relayed on his behalf. After hearing this, Xiu also noticed that he was also anxious, so he could only smile helplessly and said, "That's right, the formula hasn't changed much. You can tell after just eating it for a few days." Thinking of the medal that Dr. showed him a few days ago, Xiu patted the flying mantis and said, "You can't see anything from this formula now, but you will understand why I did it after you evolve." It's a pity that the flying mantis didn't understand him at all. For the flying mantis, he would eat anything. He knew how difficult it was to find food by himself in the past, so he was never picky about food. "You will understand in the future, you will understand in the future." Xiu didn't say this anymore, just watching the two of them talking to themselves. Come on, let's run and you can follow us." "You can't use your superpowers." Xiu pulled a few elves up and started running in the morning, and even Casey was not immune. The reason for making this decision is that Xiu felt that rather than passively relying on the little bit contained in the rations to have an effect, it would be better to exercise more in peacetime. Especially the recent performance of Flying Mantis has proved to Xiu that exercise is the most correct way to enhance physical fitness. For people like Casey who are accustomed to using their superpowers every day, their body muscles are not used and muscle atrophy will occur over time. How can they strengthen their physical fitness? Just like a fat person who either sits and plays with the computer or lies down with his mobile phone every day, you still want to get in good health by eating some messy things. This is simply whimsical. It doesn't matter if you are a member of Dobeo.com, you just want to eat peaches. This isn't the first time Xiu has said this to Kathy, but he just hasn't changed. Right? You heard that right, Casey can be lazy and disobedient too. Moreover, Xiu had no time to follow up on this matter before, so he could only put it aside for now. It was only now that Xiu made up his mind to help Casey get well. That small amount of rations will not have any effect in a short period of time, so a multi-pronged approach is necessary. After hearing Xiu's words, Casey reluctantly exited the suspended state and fell to the ground. "Let's go," Xiu waved to the elves, and several elves started running behind him. It's also interesting to say that some of the elves who were sitting in the backyard eating and waiting to die would join the team and run with them. Xiu guessed that this was because Xiu's training stimulated their survival instincts. These were engraved in their blood, even for these elves who had been comfortable for a long time. Especially the armored rhinoceros, the ground trembles when it runs, and it is the one who runs happiest every time. Maybe it also wants to run freely on the endless grassland. Xiu, who was running, had to look back at Casey from time to time to prevent him from being lazy. They were running and Casey was walking. At this time, Shiu also thought that ordinary Casey seemed to rely on teleportation to move around all day instead of walking. It must be that the entire race hates walking. After running for half an hour, Shiu broke away from the team and ran to the warehouse alone. At this hour, it was time to prepare breakfast. After they finished running, it would be almost ready to eat. Speaking of which, since Shiu arrived, the atmosphere in the entire backyard has become more lively, much more lively than the lazy one before. It's right to think about it, because Dramu has no time to deal with them at all, and is busy doing some strange experiments and research every day. It's just that not long after Shiu went in, Casey came back. Shiu, who was preparing breakfast, looked at Casey and smiled and said, "How do you feel? You're very tired." After saying that, Shiu picked up its portion of ration and handed it over and said, "It is best to eat it at this time for better absorption." Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 118. Then he took out another glass of juice and handed it over, saying with a smile, "Master, your breakfast has been served, please take your time." After saying that, he bent back towards Casey, pretending to be an aristocratic butler, but his level of pretense was more like that of a waiter who had just received a tip. Unfortunately, his funny performance only made him laugh, and Kathy didn't react at all. Shiu didn't care and went back to continue his work. Casey didn't help either, just watching the repair work while enjoying a hearty breakfast. In fact, the work here is similar to that in the park at that time. It is relatively easy and there is a lot of free time. Although there is no salary, there are many hidden benefits. After feeding the elves in the backyard, Shiu had time to do his own thing. Yes, he just went to have breakfast. It was 7 o'clock standard time, but this cultivator did not knock on the door again, but opened the door directly and went in. These days, Dr. Damu spends his time in the laboratory on the second floor. Except for some necessary activities, he spends the rest of his time on research. However, Shiu looked at Dr. Oki and became more and more energetic. His hands that hit the keyboard were strong and powerful, and the sound of the keycaps clashing was like a piano playing, one after another, with a strong sense of impact. This kind of life still has an impact on Shiu and the others, because Dr. Oak needs the data of the two of them, which has caused the training progress of Casey and Flying Mantis to be slowed down many times. Now the two elves are more familiar with the laboratory than Shiu. However, Shiu, who has been helping, has basically learned how to operate the instruments, and can also understand some simple data. Really, the experience of actual operation and reading and learning are two completely different experiences. Once you start, it is easy to get started. Now DROE has almost completed the sample analysis of the flying mantis sickle fragments. "Doctor, let's have breakfast first." These days Shiu always brings breakfast to Dramu. Your last suggestion was of no use. Dramu crossed his hands on his chest and leaned on the computer chair. The screen kept refreshing, and data appeared one after another. "What's wrong?" Shiu put down the things in his hands and leaned over. While Shiu was looking at the data, Dramu added, "In order to explore the effects of different metal elements on the flying mantis, I set up multiple control groups, using the exposure time as the variable. The last batch of data has just come out." Dramu sat upright, quickly tapped the keyboard with both hands, and a data model was called up. "You see, although some results have been achieved, the situation is not optimistic." Shiu looked at the curve trends of these models, and after a while he said, "Doctor, you seem to have forgotten one thing." "What?" Dramu turned to look at Shiu. "Those fragments are no longer active after leaving the body of the flying mantis, or they are inactive when they are still there." "I know this, but if I don't do this experiment, how could you use the flying mantis on me?" this. He didn't understand what Dro said. Xiu was stunned for a moment before asking, is the doctor going to start a real experiment? How is Flying Mantis doing now? Isn't it enough for the doctor to just say no? Xiu felt like he was dumbfounded. The Flying Mantis is in normal condition. After this period of training, it has reached its peak limit. Start the experiment on the Flying Mantis. I have completed the metabolic analysis. I can handle it even if there is any trouble. Xiu agreed without too much nonsense. This was what they had agreed on before. Wait until Xiu brings the Flying Mantis to the laboratory on the second floor of the institute. Dro is counting some strange things. Xiu was somewhat surprised when he saw the packages of materials with different labels. Dro saw him like this and explained, the items we test metals are generally corrosion, density, strength, melting point, and the changes in these items when the temperature changes. After Dro introduced the performance indicators of metals, he did not stop. Instead, he started talking about the composition and ratio of metals, as well as the effects of these different metals on fragments. Xiu knew that he was teaching himself, but he still had a question. What do you want to do now, doctor? After hearing this, Dro stopped and thought for a while before saying, this is a good question. I can't make up my mind either. Do you have any ideas? Xiu knew that Dro was testing him, so he said. This depends on the absorption rate of different metals by the flying praying mantis. I think we can start with external use. How to say? Both sides of the sickle are coated with different metals and then tested. Aren't you following the same old path? Why do I need to conduct experiments like this? Isn't this safe? The two people discussed the matter of the flying mantis for a long time, but no one could tell for sure. Let's try it for external use first. Xiu finally had no choice but to say this. Okay, it's not going to take more than a few days anyway. Dro looked indifferent. I understand. Xiu nodded. Then continue working and mix these materials according to the ratio I gave. I want to make one first to test the performance. Yes. Xiu immediately took what Dro was holding. Each of the 6 jars that Dro took out just now contained a portion of metal powder. Then choose 2 kinds, mix the powder into the adhesive and apply them on the sickles on both sides. Let's go, the sickle can't be used these days, let's practice running first. Xiu took Sai the way, and Dro was still devoted to research. 3 days later, Xiu took Scythe to the second floor of the institute, and then tore off the things attached to its sickle, revealing the blade inside. Isn't this amazing? Xiu looked at the blushing blade, a little dazed for a while, stretched out his hand to rub it, and then looked at Dro after confirming it. It's such an effect in 3 days. It turns out that there is a big difference between the out-of-body and the original. Dro was also a little surprised to see this scene. After all, the effect was too good, which was a bit beyond his expectations. But compared to this, Dro had more things to want to know, and immediately said, "Get ready and start testing the performance." Dro got up and fiddled with the instruments again, and Xiu could only follow him. Soon Dro returned to his original position with some strange things. "Come, let's test the structure first, and extend the sickle." Professor Oak put a fist-sized object on the table. This thing is roughly square, but there is a metal structure protruding from the top. It seems that no one knows what it is used for. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 119. Spy Mantis had long been accustomed to all kinds of strange tests, and had no intention of resisting them. Instead, he raised his sickle and put it on. And Dro also held a mobile phone-sized object and slid it back and forth along the blade. After testing both sickles, he put away the things and said to Shiu, "The combination effect is very good, but... Doctor, you tell me. It's hard to say. We have to wait for the analysis of the components to be confirmed." Dr. Oak did not say it directly, but left this question and started other tests. "Let's do some hardcore destructive experiments. You go and move those things out." Shiu moved the things to the open space near the research institute in the backyard according to Dr. Oak's instructions. "Come on, don't call for energy, just chop it simply, chop this hand twice, and then go to the other one." Dr. Oak stood aside with an experimental record book, directing Spy Mantis. Spy Mantis did not hesitate too much, raised his right hand and swung the knife at the two metal ingots. Shiu, who was standing by, actually heard the sound of metal colliding at that moment. Afterwards, he hurried forward to check and found that the blade was not damaged, but there was an extra mark on the metal ingot. "Don't worry, this thing is like a nail, it won't be a problem." Seeing Shiu so nervous, Dr. Oak comforted casually, and then urged Scythe to test. After a chopping, the metal ingot gradually upgraded, and soon Shiu heard a crisp cracking sound, and the scythe sickle was broken after all. Dr. Oak was not surprised at all. While recording something, he said, "Sort and pack up the fragments, then Scythe can leave first. You follow me to do the follow-up test." "Yes." Dr. Oak turned around and went back to the research institute after he finished speaking, without any intention of staying. Shiu didn't say anything nonsense, and hurried forward to arrange Scythe, then packed up his things and hurried to catch up. When Shiu went in, he saw Dr. Oak fiddling with an instrument, and asked curiously, "Has the doctor not finished yet?" "It's probably been too long, there's something wrong." Dr. Oak didn't even raise his head, his hands were still fiddling with the machine. Shiu was watching from the side, and didn't say much. Although he knew a little about the machine, there was no need to go up and give instructions, because Dr. Oak was the expert. Dr. Oak finished it soon, and said to Shiu, "Take this thing over first, I'll be here soon." Shiu took a look at the thing in his hand and nodded in agreement. Soon, new research began in the laboratory. Dr. Oak held a pen and paper, and his eyes kept looking at the metal in the crucible that was beginning to turn into liquid. "What temperature is it now?" On the other side, Shiu held a camera-like thing and pointed it at the red liquid in the crucible. After hearing what Dr. Oak said, he reported the data on the screen. "More than 2,700 degrees. The melting point is..." Dr. Oak raised his hand to write down the data, then looked through a table full of data, muttering, "Next, test the melting point of the fragments." Shiu put the fragments in another crucible as instructed, and then turned the flame on the nozzle to roast them. The fragments gradually turned gray and white during the burning, and then broke into smaller pieces, completely lacking the properties that metal should have. There is no sign of melting, and it still turned completely gray and white at about 300 degrees. "Turn off the fire." Dr. Oak picked up a short metal stick and poked the residue in the crucible with an expressionless face. The gray and white fragments that were originally like ceramics turned directly into powder. It seems about the same." "What did the doctor say?" Shiu looked over there when he heard Dr. Oak's words. "The absorption of Scyther is not simply accumulating metal elements, there are deeper changes in it." "What does that mean?" Shiu asked immediately. "That is to say, the characteristics of Scyther after absorbing metal elements are very different from those of metal. The reason is naturally the combination problem." Dr. Oak said this with a little annoyance, but he stopped at the beginning and did not intend to continue. He turned and said, "Come on, you sort out the fragments and metal blocks first, and I will get some corrosive liquid." After explaining the matter, Dr. Oak ran to the other side. Shiu, who was blocked by the filing cabinets, had to focus on the workbench. "Use tools to cut out shapes of the same size as the fragments on the metal plate." "How is it?" "Is it done?" Dr. Oak walked over here with 3 brown-gray bottles. Well, it's almost done. Chiu quickly finished the work at hand and put the things in pairs. Then let's get started. Dr. Oak put down what he was doing and picked up the form, writing and drawing on it. After a while, he put the form down and picked up a bottle again. You take notes. Chiu said nothing, watching Dr. Oak pick up a piece of metal, put it on a petri dish, and then opened the glass bottle. A sour smell spread out. Chiu, who was closer, took a step back on the spot, but Dr. Oak had a blank expression on his face, as if he didn't smell anything. His hands were as steady as a machine, and he slowly poured the bottle, and a ball of thick green sticky substance slid down from the mouth of the bottle and dripped onto the metal. The metal reacted violently at the moment of contact, and dense bubbles emerged like boiling water. These bubbles burst at the moment of formation, emitting a wisp of thick white smoke, but more bubbles continued to be born. In just 3 or 5 seconds, the 2-finger-sized metal dissolved in the glass bottle. The thick green liquid turned brown and was no longer viscous. Instead, it became like water, mixed with flocculi and some foam aggregates floating on the top. Dr. Oak watched the reaction end, and then poured things towards the fragments on his own. However, this time the metal withstood the test, and the green viscous matter just adhered to it, and there was no big reaction. After waiting for about 10 seconds, Dr. Oak picked out the fragments with a glass rod, and then said casually, "Go get some clean water." "Yes," Chiu responded quickly and ran out like a fugitive. Xiaochen wants to complain about Professor Oak not following the laboratory rules. He actually started working without any protection. This corrosive is so dangerous. If it splashes on the body or eyes, it will cause blindness. Logically, he has been doing research for so many years, there is no reason why he doesn't know this. Is it because he is so skilled that he is bold, or is it because the laboratory rules in this world have not been perfected yet? Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 120. Now that I think about it, it seems that no protective equipment has ever been found in the laboratory. After fetching clear water, Dr. carefully picked out the fragments, then passed them through the water, and finally took them out with tweezers. "There's no trace at all," Chiu couldn't help but say when he saw the fragments. On the contrary, Dr. seemed very calm and said casually, "This is because the properties of the combined products are different." After that, he put the fragment into the potion again. This was only one of the 3 bottles of medicine. When Dr. opened the second bottle, a strange smell came out. I don't know what Dr. brought out. I actually felt a little dizzy after smelling it. "Doctor, what are these? They smell so strong." Chiu carefully observed those things. One was green, one was purple, and one was colorless. The first 2 colored ones looked more viscous, while the colorless ones looked like water. Putting these 3 together, not only they look magical, but more importantly, the sourness of the 3 smells mixed together, it's really hard to describe. Dr. glanced at Chiu and then explained. "The green one is the gastric juice of the dissolving beast, the purple one is the dissolving fluid of the Arbo monster, and the transparent one is strong acid." Dr. also specially added, "The dissolving fluid of the Arbo monster is with it is toxic and will make you dizzy if you inhale too much." Dr. said this with a nonchalant look and he was really speechless. He quickly ran to open several windows and fans in the laboratory, and then covered several vessels with lids to prevent the smell from escaping. Then he asked, "I heard that the gastric juice of the molten beast can corrode any metal. Why doesn't it seem to have no reaction here? It is impossible that all metals can corrode. Every metal has its own characteristics. Some metals are very resistant to corrosion." Speaking of this, Dr. added enthusiastically. "In fact, it is not that the metal itself is resistant to corrosion, but that when the metal comes into contact with the air, a very thin layer of special material will be produced that adheres to the surface. It is that thin layer that is the real reason why the metal is resistant to corrosion." "Understood," Shall we continue? He glanced at Doromu and asked. It's no longer necessary now. You can come up and play if you like. Doromu gave up his position and motioned Shiu to come up with his eyes. Looking at the 3 bottles on the table, Shiu hesitated before going up. These are materials that are difficult to obtain. Of course you should seize the opportunity to learn about it yourself now, so that you will be able to understand the situation if you encounter it. Seeing Shiu walking up like this, Doromu warned, be careful, don't get hurt. There is no cure for this. When Doromu said this, Shiu's hand holding the kin couldn't help but tremble. For convenience, he placed the metal fragments into 3 glass vessels and began the experiment. Imitating Doroku's movements, he carefully opened the bottle and poured it slowly. The smell was stronger when he was closer, the sour smell was more obvious, and there was a burning sensation in his throat when he breathed. He was so frightened that he quickly held his breath and concentrated, not daring to be careless again. A green silk thread hung from the mouth of the bottle, but when the gastric juice came into contact with the metal piece, a burst of white mist suddenly exploded. The unprepared Shiu subconsciously leaned back, and the bottle in his hand also moved violently with his movements, until a one hand grabbed Shiu's wrist. Be careful, your hand will be gone if the contents inside leak out. Seeing Doromu's smiling face behind him, Shiu suddenly knew why Doromu let him go up. Shiu said nothing and shook the bottle after standing firm. No wonder there was so little gastric juice in the bottle just now. When I looked over again, I saw that the metal piece inside the glass vessel had turned into sewage with white foam, like rusty molten iron, brown-red. Damn it! So strong? I turned my head and looked at the 3 fragments next to me again. They were soaked but nothing happened. The anti-corrosion effect must be too good. Doroku saw Shiu like this and asked, do you still want to try? Try? Why not try? Shiu picked up another bottle, this time the purple one was poured out, and the consistency was a bit thinner than the green one. Based on the experience last time, this time Shiu first held his breath, then tilted his head to one side, watching the 2 come into contact, but the effect this time was different from the previous one. There was no white mist, only squeaking sounds. The whole piece of metal reacted violently like fried dough sticks in a frying pan, but it was nothing compared to the previous one. Doromu on the side explained, the dissolving solution of the Arbo monster does not rely on corrosion to kill, but relies on corroding the epidermis to make it easier for toxins to invade. Shiu did not stop the experiment, but picked up the 3rd bottle. After completing the 3 experiments, we can basically get the corrosiveness of these 3 liquids. However, Shiu wanted to do another experiment, but this time he used meat as the experimental subject, so that he could more intuitively observe what would happen if elves or humans came into contact. It is a pity that this suggestion was rejected by Doroe. The 2 did not stop, but continued to conduct various tests until all the fragments were used up. Doroe took the record and read it over, then handed it to Shiu and asked, see what's wrong? After Shiu took it, he read it from beginning to end, and after a little thought, he replied. Surprisingly, the data on both sides are similar. It seems that different metal elements have little effect. It should be that the metal element is transformed into another substance by Scyther's body, and then acts on itself. Professor Oak threw out a guess expressionlessly, and then did not forget to add a sentence. Of course, this requires more detailed experiments to know. Shiu frowned when he heard this, but he also knew what Professor Oak meant, so he could only remain silent. The 2 finally finished the day's research after the discussion. If you want to confirm Professor Oak's conjecture, you must repeat the previous experiments many times, which means that Scyther will suffer a lot. I have to communicate with Scyther about this matter, otherwise it will be very troublesome. Although it sounds ridiculous, trainers and Pokemon really need to be bound. Don't think that Pokeballs are omnipotent and will listen to you when you put them in. It's really ridiculous. Ordinary Pokeballs are essentially residences, just like those Pokeballs with strange functions, providing a dormant space for Pokemon.